Hi there, it's Grandma, and it's time for a story again. All right, the one I have for today is called The Luck of the Loch Ness Monster, a tale of picky eating. So it's a story about the Loch Ness Monster, who's a mythical monster who lives in the waters by Scotland. But it's also about a girl who's a picky eater. Once upon a time, a little girl named Katerina Elizabeth took an ocean liner to visit her grandmother in Scotland. It was the first time she had traveled by herself. Her parents had thoughtfully planned every step of her trip for her, even her meals. So for breakfast the first day, Katerina Elizabeth found a bowl of gray, gooey oatmeal, her least favorite food in the world. Her parents always told her that without oatmeal, she would grow up stunted or short. She threw it out the porthole. The oatmeal sank in a lump to the bottom of the sea. By luck, it landed next to a tiny sea worm, no bigger around than a thread and no longer than your thumbnail. The sea worm had never seen anything as lovely as oatmeal. It gobbled it up. By the time it finished eating, it was as thick as yarn and as long as your hand. It decided to follow the ship. The next morning, Katerina Elizabeth watched the other diners enjoying cinnamon rolls with icing. But for Katerina Elizabeth, it was oatmeal again. She threw it out the porthole and grabbed a cinnamon roll. Again, the oatmeal sank like lead. The worm gobbled it up. It grew even longer, as long as your whole body. Then it swallowed the bowl, too. Katerina Elizabeth found, sadly, that her parents had ordered oatmeal for her every day. Soon the delighted worm learned to swim right under the porthole at breakfast and to catch her oatmeal in midair. The worm surprised Katerina Elizabeth the first time she saw it. She did not especially like snaky things. She began to change her mind, however, when she realized how quickly the worm learned tricks. When the ship reached Scotland, it continued up the river Ness to Loch Ness. The worm followed. Katerina Elizabeth was glad to escape the boat to stay with her grandmother, who had been born in the Ukraine and did not know how to make oatmeal. But the worm cried. Anxious to find more oatmeal, the worm circled Loch Ness. Luckily, oatmeal is the national breakfast food of Scotland, and as many Scottish children hate it as American ones do. All along the lake the next morning, the worm heard the plop of oatmeal being hurled by children out the window of their thatched cottages and into the lake. All that summer, the sea worm, now the lake worm, made morning rounds of the lake to salvage the children's oatmeal. After a few months, a child leaving her house early one morning saw the worm plowing through the water. "Hey, a monster!" she shouted. The worm was about to politely correct the child, but first looked at its reflection in the water. The worm saw that it had changed a great deal since the first bite of oatmeal. It was now as thick as an elephant's belly and as long as a main hall of an elementary school. It had sleek scales and an imposing row of fins down its back, and, while white teeth that were quite sharp, perhaps because nothing tougher than oatmeal had ever worn them down. The worm, now the monster, was thrilled with its home in Loch Ness. It found that there were other Scottish foods that children often tossed in the lake, such as haggis and suet pudding. It grew fond of them too. The monster was lucky that it loved Loch Ness, because by then it was too big to swim down the river and back to the sea. Sometimes, though, the monster worried about the future. What if all the children moved away? Being an American worm, however, it knew the usefulness of advertising, and occasionally it allowed itself to be seen at dawn. Soon tourists flocked to Loch Ness. Many rode the morning tour boats, hoping to see Nessie, and while waiting, they ordered the national dish. After a few bites, they too would discreetly throw it overboard. At the end of Nessie's first summer, the most famous Loch Ness monster sighting occurred as a big ship was leaving for America. To the amazement of all, the monster rose up from the deep, arched his back, and kissed a small American child named Katerina Elizabeth on the nose. Despite her parents' warning about the importance of oatmeal, Katerina Elizabeth lived happily ever after. But it was true, though, that she grew up to be 3 inches shorter than everyone else in her family. The end. Huh, that was kind of a fun story, something different. All right, hope you enjoyed the story. Grandma loves you.